Hi everyone and welcome back to my playlist, and here we are covering nestjs with GraphQL. Okay, so we have already talked about the introduction and the agenda of this whole playlist. Now we can get started with the writing nestjs application with the GraphQL. So we are going to start everything from the basic, like how to build the basic nestjs application using nest CLI. So we are going to use nestjs CLI and we are going to build everything from scratch. Okay, like we can generate a simple nestjs project, and then in that project we will introduce all the different things like how to introduce the GraphQL using nestjs GraphQL modules, and then we will write resolvers and expose query and mutation from the APIs. So I'm starting this project from the scratch so I can explain all the different parts, not some existing boilerplate code which I already have in different repositories. So let's wait for this CLI. Then what we can do is, it's same as the Angular CLI kind of setup. Here we can just do is nest new. This is the next command which we can hit, nest new and the project name. So this is our scaffolding. We are going to use npm. It is installing all the modules, and these are all the folders and the files getting created. Okay, we have nest CLI, we have package.json, we have tsconfig because the code is in TypeScript. We can see one controller, one module and one service, and this is the main module which is the root module, and the main.ts is bootstrapping that root module. Okay, so it has all the basic structure which we need for the project. Now we can start adding the nestjs GraphQL. In the GraphQL dependencies, we are going to use postgres, so we can also add the dependencies for the typeorm, because nestjs typeorm and nestjs GraphQL, these are the two main modules we are going to use. So we were using nestjs CLI, and with the help of nestjs CLI we were able to create this basic application. This is the basic folder structure which contains the default service, controllers and the modules. Now we need to introduce all the required other modules, because we are now using GraphQL. So there is a nestjs GraphQL module which we have to add to our this module setup. Before going to that direction, one common topic I also wanted to cover is, let's make this folder structure production ready and include all the required things we wanted to have in a project. So what all things we always want to have in any particular JavaScript or TypeScript project. So recently I added one blog, and this blog particularly talks about how to baseline a nestjs microservice. Okay, we call something baseline when it includes all different aspects of a microservice. Let's say here we are writing a GraphQL based service, so it should contain all the test setup, all the linting setup, all the guidelines, all the linting setup, and even you can also introduce some GitHub hooks using Husky, so that whenever you do the commit, it automatically run the prettier, it checks for the linting, and it format your code, right? And it also executes the test cases. You should also have the configurations for the Docker and Docker Compose. You should have the proper compiler configurations and the build configuration with the tsconfig. CI pipeline, if you are planning to deploy it to Heroku, let's say we are building the GraphQL, simple GraphQL app, we can also plan to deploy it to Heroku. So all these things should already be configured, then we can call a project as a baseline. And the baseline means, just after using nest CLI we created a barebone folder structure. Now we can add on all the required things. Okay, I need a prettier, I need a eslint, eslint rc, prettier rc, I need a GitLab YML file, I need a proc file for the Heroku deployments, or maybe the CI pipeline file based on your deployment. Either you are using GitHub Travis CI or GitLab CI, but your file structure can be something like this. Okay, this is my target. So what do we have in the baseline structure? You should have a eslint rc, if you are using docker file and docker compose dependencies, because we need the postgres container and the node container, and then jest configurations because we have to write the test cases using jest in the nestjs, and all the build configurations for the tsconfig. Not more if you wanted to start the applications, or you can just use nest cli start dev command, and all the hooks, the husky, which is pretty much working with the commit lint, and the prettier to enforce the coding guidelines, right? Commit guidelines, even the commit guidelines when you are randomly putting any commits. So this blog particularly talks about, okay, what all different modules we need. So I will be just adding those in the project and start using them. So let's say I wanted to use a commit lint, so I need to install the commit lint CLI and the commit convention. All these modules I will be adding in the dev dependency of our project. So here these are our dev dependencies. I will put them somewhere in the middle. We already have the, I think, the eslint configuration, so we don't need to worry about adding them again. Okay, then I think I need to add a config, commit gen config in the package.json. And I think here we are using jest in the package.json only, so we have to remove this jest configuration, and we can have particularly jest e2e config, jest config and all. And I need to write commit lint config.js file in my code base in the root. This will enable the commit lint. Okay, this is the first thing. Now I can introduce husky in my project. So what I will do is, first of all, I can install, and this should also install other modules which we have recently added. Okay, so what will husky do? Husky is, I mean, when you are running a scripts automatically, you can actually introduce the GitHub hooks, like when you are doing a commit. Then what you want before commit, you wanted to give a proper format to your commit. Commit can be a feature, can be a bug fix, refactor, build, or the style changes or something like that, right? So before you even create a commit on your GitHub history, local Git history, what it will do, it will run a lint, it will run a prettier, and it will just check all the formatting of the code. So you can introduce the Git hooks. So what you can do is you create a .husky folder, and it will and you can introduce the Git hooks. Git hooks can be simple as git commit, git message. So there are pre and post hooks you can introduce for commit, like prepare commit message, pre-commit commit message. So what we will do is we can create one script here, prepare install. So looks like we already have, so we can introduce this script that will do some baselining. So when I do npm run prepare, so basic git hook is installed. This is husky.sh. Now here we will start creating these GitHub hooks, right? So what we are doing is, inside husky we can create this commit message. Okay, then we have a pre-commit, prepare commit message. If you look into the script, it is nothing but it is enforcing some guidelines on us. When we are creating new commit, these pre and post hooks will execute. Okay, let's say the commit message. So these are some of the hooks I'm adding in my project. This is pre-commit and this is my commit message. So now whenever you are adding a new commit, then this pre-commit hook will introduce, and it will run the lint, and it will run the prettier, and it is just using the husky to do all those things. Okay, now with husky we can also think about introducing the prettier, because husky is enforcing prettier to execute. So let's talk about that first, setting up the eslint and prettier. So for the eslint, like now tslint will be deprecated soon, we will be using eslint everywhere only. So these are some of the modules. I think these are already there. If we look into my package.json, all the eslint related dev dependencies, so these are starting from here to here. So do we have everything already there? The parser, eslint plugin, and config parser, and the config prettier. If you wanted to add on other plugins, you can add, but looks like I do have everything required. Now I can create my eslint RC. I think we already have some default one. Now it depends on, okay, what do you want? This eslint RC is using extending these plugins, the recommended eslint standards and the prettier standards. So I think this is already satisfying our needs, that we are using recommended, and we are also introducing the prettier formatting. So prettier will override whatever the rules which has been imported from the tslint standard. Okay, this is also doing the same thing. We are using recommended and eslint recommended, and we are also using the prettier recommended. Okay, now prettier RC, this is the file which we can introduce. These are the common prettier configurations. We can add some more. These rules will override some rules, some standard rules provided by the eslint, and then we can write these standard npm scripts. What these are doing: npm run lint, npm run prettier, npm run prettier write, npm run format, npm run lint fix. These are something which we will need while writing the code every time, like prettier write, prettier format, and all these things. I think some of these we might already have, like the format. So what we will do is we will put our stuff, and this looks nice now, and we can execute npm run prettier. What it will do is it will run prettier against all the JS files, TypeScript files, YAML, and all. Prettier write, you are giving a right to the prettier to update the files if there is a formatting mismatch, right? And then there is a format. So these are all the commands which we are using. And then build configurations. It's good to have a one common build configuration, but what we can do is we can have a two build configuration which is already there in the nest CLI. This tsconfig build is extending the global tsconfig, and sometimes you wanted to override the tsconfig parameters just for creating the build, then you can actually override them. So this is my main tsconfig. What it is saying is, okay, modules I'm using common.js, my out directory is dist, target is ES 2017, all the TypeScript compiler options, metadata decorators, experimental decorators, and all these flags, strict nulls, and all. Now if I wanted to override few properties, I can do it. So what I'm doing is, you can extend the tsconfig and create the build config, and here I can provide my additional compiler option. So let's keep it dist only. Okay, root directory is / declaration false, remove comment. So this is particularly I'm creating for build, right? I don't need source map and all these things, and I wanted to exclude all the things which I don't want to be executed in the build. So there may be a coverage, there may be some other folders. You can exclude all the type of folders which you don't want to put inside a build. So I don't want it to build node modules, all the tests, everything which is there in the dist. I don't want it to build it because that is the outcome, and tests I'm skipping, right? And then all the test related configurations. Test related configuration means we are using jest, and in this baseline project which is generated from the nest CLI, here I think the jest configurations are has been placed in the package.json itself. What we can do is we can remove or isolate these things. Let me just clean up the package.json. Here we have the jest configuration, but what happens is when we are writing the nestjs, we always have the jest config, then we have just e2e config and a lot of other just related configurations. So it's better that we should create our own configuration files for the jest, and we already have I think the commands to run the tests. Test is using jest, test watch, test coverage, right? So what we can do, we can create a simple jest config file, jestconfig.ts, and that will take care of all these things. And one more file which you can add is just e2e. I think it should look like just e2e.config.js, and with some modifications from the existing jest configuration you should be able to add. Okay, so let's take a look on to these things. We have, I think we need to check the jest config. It's just config.e2e. Like if you wanted to write end-to-end test cases, you want to have something else, then you can have this separate configuration. And what does it has? It has the same things, but if you want to execute the test, because here we are targeting a particular set of files, right, which contains the e2e.js, e2e.spec.js. So I will just test config e2e, and then we have a just config. Just config. If we read this configuration file, it is plain and simple. What it is doing is set of files. Here these are the set of files before running the test cases. What it is saying is inside test I need set up environment variable file. So inside test I will create one file which will help us to bootstrap the environments for the test projects. And what we are doing inside this, we are just writing these 2 lines of code. What we are saying is use the .env and put everything inside process.env from env.test. So we need to create env.test file that will be used for test environment, and .env will be used for local environment, and this we are not going to commit. We are going to create env.example file, so you can take a look what all environment variables we are going to populate. Okay, so looks like we have most of the setup ready. Now we can introduce the Docker, which is the last thing I think we have, and that is also important one. So most of the projects which I am building are either using Postgres, some kind of a ORM tool with some database, MySQL, Postgres or MongoDB. So it's like it's 2 container project. One is a Node.js container, another is a Postgres. So we can create a Docker file. Sometimes, I mean, your baseline project should contains all the configuration. It doesn't mean that you wanted to use all the containers. You can disable, enable or comment the container you wanted to use. Here we are using typeorm. So we also need to create orm config.ts. If you are using typeorm, then you are already aware. We are not going to put anything inside this, but later we will put something there. Okay, then we have tsconfig. Now let's create a Docker file. Docker file is same as like other Docker files. What we are doing here is we are just spinning up the node container and copying the code, copying the package and package log file, and just doing npm run build and exposing the port. This is from all my baseline projects we have, and finally we are executing this command npm run start prod. Okay, and this is Buster Slim image, which is a lightweight image, and we are using this Docker entry point. This script is just to, okay, when you are starting the Docker again and again, we don't need to execute npm install and all these things or typeorm migrations. So these are some custom script I have added as a Docker entry point, which will get executed and it will save our time when we are spinning up container again and again. And then we have Docker compose file. I always create Docker compose and Docker compose override. The Docker compose contains your containers, what all containers you want to have, and I think we should have something already placed in this. So what do I have? I have two containers. One is the node container, another is a postgres, right? Node container is being built from this current folder. There is a Docker file. I think we can skip the volume for the npmrc, and it is pointing like this. This is the volume mapping of the current source code in the root directory with the app inside the container, and we are using postgres. Another is I'm using Docker compose override. Here I will expose the ports and all the environment variables. Okay, I misplaced the code. It should be Docker compose override, and this should be inside Docker compose YML. You may not need a Node.js container. What I do is, once your application is up and running, you can actually start using Node even without container. You can just do npm run start dev, and for Postgres, like if you are using database connection, you can use just localhost and the port name. The port name for the database is 5434 for your host system. Okay, and these are the environment variables I have. So this is a plain and simple Docker setup. We will spin up the containers and we will see how it is going to work. Okay, so if we look into Docker compose override file, here we are using Docker utils. We are mounting Docker utils into entry point for the Docker. So what this Docker utils will do, we can have some custom script which will bootstrap our Postgres container with the predefined set of database. So what we are doing is we are passing this variable, right? Example API testing. So what we want is when the container is coming up, we already have these two database and our application starts connecting and using these database. So we can create this Docker util folders. So this is the, I think, the last thing we have, and after that we will test our application. So create new folder, and we have Docker utils, and inside Docker utils we are going to put some scripts. Okay, so Docker utils, I mean the first script, which is entry point script, is not needed for the database. We can also remove it. What we want is, with the help of this script, we wanted to create the database. Okay, so I already have a predefined script. What it does is it uses this variable, it logs in with the Postgres user, and it will create these two database. It's like running a loop on the Postgres multiple database, and it actually isolating the names with the comma. It sees there are two database, and it is just creating these two database for us. I mean, it is executing this script, this method two times by passing the database, right? It is saying create user, this particular database, create database this, and grant the privilege on this database to this user. Okay, okay, so this is all about the Docker setup we have. I mean, I usually don't run the Node.js on the container because I already have a lot of container running on my system. I will just run Postgres, and I will use the Node.js local setup. And whenever you wanted to use a database, so you can use the environment variable with the port which is specified for the host, which is 5434. I mean, you will connect to the Postgres container using 5434 through the host name as localhost. Okay, now another very small things we can add on. We can also specify the engines in the package.json file. So currently, let's say if you are sharing this project with your colleague and he doesn't have the appropriate version of Node.js, and you have a dependencies which has which are dependent on the particular version of Node.js, then it will break, right? So in the engines, we can specify the version for the node, which can be 12.x, or we can have 14.x. Okay, and the npm version, we can also specify the npm version, which should be greater than and equal to 6.9.x or something like that. And there is another thing, is the dev engine for the dev dependencies. That also we wanted to keep same, 12.x and 14.x. And to enforce this, we have to add a script, and there is a particular node module which can help us in doing that. That is, I think, fbjs script that we have to install first. And then add a script in our package.json scripts. So this is our script. And here we can add another script. What it does is, it will check the engines, and whenever you are running command, it will check the engines from the package.json. If they are not aligned with the node version you have, it will throw an error. Okay, you cannot run this project, blah blah blah. Okay, now it's time to run the project. Now other configurations you might have is the New Relic, some kind of application performance monitoring tool you have, New Relic, or some GitLab CI YML or something like that. So let's say I have another file is GitLab CI.yml that I will check later, that what all things we can have inside this, right? Or you can have some another configuration based on your CI tool, like Circle CI, Travis CI, or GitLab CI, and npm-rc file if you are using some external private module, or your organization has a GitLab registry or some private npm registry from where you wanted to fetch the modules. In that case, you can have npm-rc. Rest we have a env.test, env.example configurations. If you wanted to use nodemon, this is my favorite module. Like whenever I change the code, I wanted to restart the application, but that is also provided by nest CLI. I think that is start dev. It actually watch all your changes happening in your src, and it will keep restarting your application. So nodemon is not required. You can have a New Relic if you are using some application performance monitoring tool. Just write a nice and clean readme file, and this is your the basic project. Now we will run the docker containers, and we will see the application running. Okay, so let's start our application. What we can do is, first we can check our docker container, it is running. Okay, we can just do docker compose down. We'll kill this container and we will create this container again, and we can also check if any of the volume has been created by this. Okay, so docker compose up. So because we are also going to use this postgres database script, which should create a database for us. Let's see how it goes, and then we will start our application. I think we got some permission issues. Okay, it has created database and it has interrupted here, permission denied. So let's do chmod docker utils, and then try this again. Maybe we need to kill this docker volume if it has been created. Even kill the container. just for cleanup, and then do the docker compose up again. Okay, now you can see the statements. It is creating the role, creating the database, and we are good. This container is up and running. We will use this database once we have the GraphQL APIs running and they start consuming using typeorm. Okay, for now we can just see our application. We can do npm install again because we have added some packages directly in the package.json, so it's better we do npm install again. That will install all the required dependencies which we have added additionally, and then we can do npm run start. That will just start the application where we don't have much right now. It's just going to bootstrap on 3000 port. Later we'll introduce all the configurations like populating something in the env, like something like connection url, host, port, and all the runtime configurations which we need for typeorm for the GraphQL modules. Okay, now to introduce GraphQL in our project, what do we need? So currently we have basic bare bone structure with the project baseline. Now we will start adding things onto this project. Okay, when I say some things, that means nestjs GraphQL module, because that will enable our nestjs microservice to expose the GraphQL interface. Then we will write mutations and the resolvers. Those are nothing but the ES6 classes, TypeScript classes, and we will write some modules. So inside src we can create modules, and inside modules we can create all the modules which we want, either it is a domain or a module. So we can create API module. Sometimes it is little slow. Okay, and we can do npm run start dev. That will keep starting my application. So instead of modules I will call it as a domain, and inside domain we can create all the entities. Let's say inside domain we can have, there are two type of folder strategies we can use in the nestjs enterprise project. Either you can call it as a modules, okay, the user module, account module, feature module, and every module will contain their entities, controllers, dtos, services, factories, providers inside that folder. Let's say if I'm creating a user or auth, right? Now inside user I will create all the dto, let's say dto, and then I will create services and controllers, providers, same as it is like. But currently we are not creating a big application, so what we can do, I can use a aggregated folder structure strategy where I have entities which will contain all the entities, services contains all the services. What we can do is, let me just delete this one. I will create domain again, or now we cannot call it as a domain. Let's put a modules, and here I can create, okay, there is a config module, okay, and we are going to have a database module. One you can call shared module. These are the modules, and these are actually, you can call external module, like database module will be used by all the modules, config module will be used by all the modules, and shared modules. And then you can also add a feature modules. Feature modules is like, okay, API module. Currently we have only one API module. API can be a user APIs, account APIs, or something like that. Okay, here we will put all the entities. Now this API module, here we can put entity, all our services, all our controllers, provided. So this will become a root module, and these are the additional modules. To make it, I'm always confused with the names. Domain, and in this domain I have all the modules. I can call it as a DTO, services, controllers, providers, all these things I'm going to have. And these are the external module like config module, database module, shared module, and you will expose the domain module from here, and domain module I will import in the app.module. Okay, this is a single folder structure. I will put all the controllers of this whole project here, DTOs, entities, providers, and services. Okay, let's see now in the next part like how we are going to introduce nestjs GraphQL. I mean, that is fairly easy. What we can do is we can start adding that as a dependency in our project. Currently it is just a bare bone structure, so our node application is started, but let's add our additional modules. Npm install -- save. These are the core modules. So what we are going to use is nestjs GraphQL. Okay, nestjs typeorm, I think I already have added. That is nothing to do with the GraphQL. Nestjs GraphQL we have, and type GraphQL for some typing support, typeorm for nestjs typeorm, and I will use GraphQL is another module, and GraphQL tools. I think I'm writing this correctly. GraphQL tools, and Apollo Server Express. I mean, this is all built on the Apollo Express server. I mean, this nestjs also built on top of Express, and nestjs GraphQL is just implementation on top of that. So it is hiding the overlying implementation and providing the annotations and all to create your resolvers and the queries. Okay, and then I will install some dev dependencies respective to all these modules, and we are good to start. Okay, so we have all the required modules: nestjs typeorm, nestjs GraphQL, and GraphQL Apollo Server Express, GraphQL tools. Looks like we have everything, and now we can start using all these modules in our app module. Let's see how we are going to bootstrap the app module. Or we can just create one domain module. Because this is going to be the second root module. So we have app module will be dependent on the domain module. So this will be everything. So instead of providing everything inside app module, I will use the domain module for all these things. Currently I don't have a controllers and services. Soon I will have these, and I will introduce them. Okay, so in the imports I need to specify what all modules I am importing. So as I talked about, we are going to use config module. Config module is something which is provided by nestjs config. Okay, so what we need to do is config module dot, I think I need to import this. Config module dot for root is a method, and you can actually pass all the configurations. Config module dot for root, the default implementation will look into your .env file and put all those environment variables in the process.env. Okay, we need to have a nestjs config. I think I already have it. Import config module from nestjs config. Okay, I was not having it. And then it is providing the validation schema also. With the help of that, you can actually validate your environment variables. So that is important thing. Validate schema.joy object. And regarding that, I also covered one article on my blogs, like what all possible ways you can actually populate the environment variables for your nestjs project. So managing environment in all different ways for your nestjs project. Let's say you're, because either you will be using nestjs config module or you will be writing your own config module. It's all same, right? Here what we are doing, I'm doing is config module dot for root, and I'm saying explicitly, okay, I'm just passing you this env file path, which can be dev env, production env, just use that. Okay, and if you are using the default implementation, then it will just look for whatever is in the .env and put that in the process.env. Okay, or you can specify the environment file path. Or the other option is, with the help of config module, you can also do the validation schema. What it does is it actually validates your variables, like env should be a string, port should be a number, or db url should be a string. All the environment variables either can be a boolean, number, or a string. You can also do a validate, right? Node environment variable, node env name can be develop, production, staging, qa, nothing else. The default will be development if you are not specifying. All these things you can specify, and you can also write your own config service, something like this. Okay, here I wrote my config service and my own config modules, and providing a mechanism to load all the config variables in the process.env. And when I want to use it, I'm using it something like this config module, like this config service dot get dot db, because I might have created a getter method in the config service. Okay, you can check out this. There are many possible ways of doing it. We are just using one of it. So here we can specify all the validation criteria. Okay, so we are using validation schema to validate the environment variables, and we are using Joy. So let's install that module first, and then we will import it. And here we can import this Joy in our project. So we can validate all the environment variables which we are using. I copied from nestjs documentation, and here in the validation schema, what all things we have. We can use, okay, node environment variables should be of type this, port should be of type this or that. So that I will be passing here. So another required variables we have is the database URL. We already know that we are using Postgres. So for typeorm, the connection type will be will be Postgres, and here it will be joy.string, and it will be required. Okay, so these are the validation schema I have. What does this mean is all these modules are required, and we have to pass them. Okay, this is all about the config module. Now config modules, we have a node environment, port, and the database URL. These are the minimum basic things we need. Now we can also import the typeorm module, because the typeorm module we are going to use everywhere in our project. So nestjs typeorm, because that is our database layer, typeorm module, and here we are going to dynamically initialize it using typeorm module dot, let's see how we do it, typeorm module dot for root async. There are different methods typeorm module provide for root async. So here you can see for root async, this is a synchronous dynamic initialization of a nestjs project. And here we can provide the dependency, because what it needs is we need to feed a configurations here. So we will be passing config module, and we will be injecting the config service, inject config service, and inside use factory because these are the three arguments: use factory, use class. So we will be adding the config service. We will be passing the config service of type config service, and we are going to return the config module options for this module. Okay, config service, we need to import it from nestjs config, and what we need to return, we can return the whole nestjs typeorm config module options. So if we see typeorm module options, which are name, okay, if I go inside this connection options, these are all our connection options. I think it should be extending typeorm module options. I mean, the connection options is the object which we need to pass to initialize this module. Okay, let's see this. So what all things we needed? We needed the name of the connection, which is, let's say, default, and I will pass type. Type is postgres, because we need to tell typeorm, okay, my database is postgres, and then I can simply use URL. And how you will get URL? We can use config service dot get and the same variable database URL, and all the other things also you can pass which are required. Entities, inside entities you will be passing all the ORM entities which you have. Either you will be passing some directory name, okay, this is the particular directory where I have all the ORM entities created for typeorm, and then synchronize, which I always keep false even for local development. Okay, so this is our typeorm config module. Now next thing is we will be using nestjs GraphQL module, and these ORM options are typeorm async module options. Okay, now next module we are going to use is GraphQL module.for root, because this is a GraphQL project. Okay, and just import this GraphQL module. Now what all things we can pass to initialize this module, right? So there are a couple of options like playground, your all the definitions where you are passing. Playground is true. And definitions means you have to provide a path where the schemas are kept. Okay, so we will talk about all these options, like how we are going to provide a definitions and what is the type path and what is the playground. Currently I'm passing all these things, but in the next video we will talk about, okay, what all different options you can provide. Either you already have a GraphQL schema you can pass, or you can generate the GraphQL schema from the resolvers and the queries you have already written. Okay, so let's see all these options in the next video, where we will try to understand how nestjs GraphQL module initialization really works. Okay, because at the end what we need is type definitions, resolvers and queries, and this is a simple implementation of a Yoga GraphQL or Apollo GraphQL server. It's built on top of the same thing. It's just like we need to write less code, and we just need to use annotations to do everything. Okay, let's catch up in the next video. Meanwhile, you can take a look onto this. I will also push this code to the GitHub.